The hegemony ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, their empire sprawling across the stars, its influence reaching into every corner of known space. Their fleets, massive and imposing, were the pinnacle of military power, and their voice was law. Species across the galaxy bowed in submission, their cultures and histories erased or reshaped to serve the hegemony's will. Resistance was a whispered myth. Any who dared defy the hegemony's rule simply ceased to exist, their worlds reduced to ash and rubble. Across the vastness of space, fear of the hegemony was absolute. No species was immune. They had conquered, assimilated, and destroyed, leaving nothing behind but broken resistance and hollow promises. The galaxy bent beneath their weight, the light of the stars dimming as their rule grew ever stronger. Humanity, like so many others before them, was no more than a footnote in the endless reign of the hegemony. But what they didn't know was that even the most iron grip could be pried open, and a storm was brewing. On the surface, humanity appeared to be just another conquered race, quietly playing by the hegemony's rules. Earth had joined the fold, its people seeming docile, obedient to the alien overlords. The governments of Earth signed treaties, sent representatives, and allowed the alien bureaucracy to subsume them into the empire without so much as a murmur. There were no rebellions, no insurrections, only a perfect illusion of compliance. Humanity's resilience was hidden behind the facade of peaceful coexistence, their creativity masked as compliance. They seemed content to remain in the shadows, following the laws, working the land, and maintaining their place in the hegemony's hierarchy. But beneath the surface, something darker was stirring. Humans weren't just waiting, they were calculating, adapting, and preparing for something no one had anticipated. Behind closed doors, something far more troubling was happening. Shipyards across Earth's colonies worked overtime, processing raw materials, manufacturing ships, weapons, and technology. Resource shipments to Earth tripled, and officials pored over every contract and documentation, ensuring that each transaction appeared perfectly legal, perfectly normal. The official reports claimed it was for infrastructure improvements, a common phrase, one that couldn't possibly raise any suspicion. But those who paid attention saw the pattern. Humanity was not simply following orders or improving their own worlds. They were preparing for something bigger. Weaponry was being stockpiled, not for defense, but for something far more calculated. Technological advancements were hidden behind layers of bureaucracy, disguised as routine upgrades. The hegemony couldn't see it. They never could. All the paperwork was flawless. No one questioned it, not yet. But this quiet obedience was the calm before the storm. And the storm was coming. The hegemony's officials scrutinized humanity's every move, but they were too focused on the numbers to see the bigger picture. The endless paperwork, the trade deals, the military reports, everything was filed correctly, each piece falling into place with surgical precision. The rules were followed, the law was obeyed, and there was no reason to suspect anything was amiss. To them, humanity was just another species, obedient and content in its place. But there was a flaw in their perception. The hegemony had underestimated humanity's ingenuity. They assumed the humans were content with their place in the galaxy, too small, too weak to challenge the greater powers. They didn't realize that humans weren't just adapting to their new life, they were planning their rise, using every loophole and every rule to their advantage. The bureaucracy's blind spot would soon become their fatal mistake. As the hegemony's influence stretched across the stars, something unexpected began to happen. In the quiet corridors of humanity's universities and military archives, ancient texts, long forgotten and forbidden by the hegemony, began to resurface. These were not the academic readings on diplomacy or peaceful coexistence, but the tactics of war, strategies of deception, resistance, and asymmetric warfare. the kind that could overthrow an empire from within, were being discussed in hushed voices. Humanity's war doctrines, once hidden away after the galaxy's forced peace, now sat in the hands of diplomats and military leaders alike. Books on guerrilla tactics and subversive strategies became bestsellers, passed hand to hand through secret channels. The aliens laughed, dismissing it as academic curiosity, convinced that humans could not possibly have the will or the strength to execute such plans. They were wrong. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for centuries, and their enemies had no idea what was coming. The hegemony viewed humanity's rise with a casual indifference. They were adapting, nothing more. Humanity wasn't resisting the hegemony's rule. They were simply learning to survive. At least that was what they thought, but they were dead wrong. Humanity wasn't adapting. Humanity was preparing. The hegemony was blind to the true scale of humanity's ambition. The humans had bided their time, hidden in plain sight, building a network of resources, technologies, and allies. And when the time came, they would unleash it all at once. By the time the hegemony realized its mistake, it would be too late. The human spark had already ignited. They had adapted, yes, but now they were about to reshape the galaxy in their image. The empire would burn, and humanity would rise from its ashes, stronger than ever. The hegemony had long ago decided that Earth's autonomy was a thing of the past. Their fleets loomed in the vastness of space, their shadows now stretching farther than ever before. The final phase of their conquest had begun. Every human on Earth, every corner of their once proud home, would soon be absorbed into the cold mechanical grip of the galactic machine. The hegemony was meticulous, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient. They had already dismantled Earth's defenses, eroded its political strength, and filled its space with their own bureaucratic systems. Soon the remaining fragments of human sovereignty would be but whispers in the winds of history, a footnote in the record of an empire that spanned the stars. Earth's autonomy would be a relic, another conquered world folded into the pages of the hegemony's book of conquests. Yet, even as the final preparations for their domination were underway, there was an eerie calm. Humanity, still unaware of what was coming, continued with their lives, as if nothing had changed. They had no idea that in the background the machinery of the hegemony was about to pull them into its suffocating embrace. A world was about to be consumed, without a single shot being fired. Human cities were bustling with their usual noise and chaos, markets full of life, streets packed with commuters, children laughing as they played in parks. The cities gleamed with the modernity of a world moving forward, progressing steadily, almost as if nothing had changed. Everything seemed exactly the same, as if the hegemony's dominance hadn't yet fully seeped into the fabric of human life. Earth was compliant, or so it seemed. Trade routes remained unchanged, with freighters sailing between the planets without incident. Space traffic hummed through the star lanes, peaceful and orderly, with no disruptions or signs of rebellion. The civilian population was untouched by the complexities of the galaxy-wide conquest. Life went on, and the only thing truly out of the ordinary was the growing silence from military commands. No protests, no revolts, no complaints, nothing to suggest that anything was amiss. The hegemony's leaders watched this carefully, sending reports back to their headquarters. To them it was the perfect display of humanity's acceptance. Their conquest had gone off without a hitch. Earth's people, just like every other species before them, were quietly submitting to the inevitable. But in their satisfaction, they missed the small signs that things weren't as they seemed. In the quiet hum of everyday life, something strange began to happen. The airwaves of Earth filled with an unusual surge of broadcasts, songs, speeches, and documentaries. But they were not the usual fare. The songs were about war, about the heroic struggles of humanity's past, about the glory of battle, the victories, and the defiance. The documentaries told stories of old rebellions, forgotten warriors, and the rise of a nation against impossible odds. Patriotic speeches rang across every channel. Humans were hearing the echoes of their own history,
a history of defiance, of standing against overwhelming odds. But the hegemony dismissed it, assuming it to be nothing more than cultural nostalgia. After all, no one had ever been able to stand against their might. These broadcasts were harmless, a temporary fixation that would soon fade, or so they thought. But there was a deeper current running through this surge, a subtle spark that would soon ignite. Earth's people were being reminded of something fundamental, something that had been lying dormant. And while the hegemony saw only a harmless spike in entertainment, humanity was preparing for something much more dangerous. The hegemony watched closely as humanity's military remained eerily silent. There were no protests, no demonstrations, no cries for freedom or independence, no resistance at all. The leadership of Earth had offered nothing but compliance, or so it seemed. Reports came back from the field. Everything was in order. Earth's military, once proud and defiant, had surrendered without a single shot being fired. No military actions, no diplomatic maneuvers, nothing. The hegemony took this as a clear sign of victory. Their dominance had been accepted, and the people of Earth had simply fallen into line. The military was at rest, their once feared fleets now floating peacefully in orbit, waiting for their final instructions. But this silence was deceptive. Something more was at play here. Humanity wasn't just accepting their fate, they were biding their time. They weren't choosing surrender, they were preparing. The hegemony would soon learn that when humanity is quiet, that's when they're at their most dangerous. One official, Ivor Renard, sat at his desk in the quiet of his office, staring at the data spread out before him. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. The military, the civilians, even the trade routes, all were functioning within expected parameters. There was nothing to suggest that anything was wrong, and yet, a chill ran down his spine. Something didn't feel right. Renard wasn't a fool. He knew the history of humanity. Their creativity was unmatched, their ability to adapt terrifying. He'd read the reports on their old wars, their revolutions, their rebellions. This quiet compliance was not the behavior of a defeated species. He'd seen it before, the way humans could appear passive, only to strike with the force of a storm when the time was right. His mind raced as he tried to shake off the unease, but the doubts wouldn't go away. He couldn't ignore the strange spike in the entertainment broadcasts, the subtle shifts in the media, the way humanity seemed almost too calm, too compliant. There's something we're missing, Renard muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. A chilling realization washed over him. The hegemony was blind, and it might be too late to stop what was coming. The hegemony pushed forward, confident that their dominance was secure. They believed humanity had accepted their place in the galaxy, that Earth was simply another world to be absorbed into the empire. The plans for Earth's complete assimilation were set in motion, and there were no signs of resistance, at least, none that the hegemony could see. But behind the scenes, humanity had been preparing. Every small action, every broadcast, every decision had been carefully calculated. The trap was set. Earth's leaders, the military, the people, they were all playing their part. The universe didn't know it yet, but a storm was about to hit, and when it did, the hegemony would find itself outmatched. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Humanity had watched, listened, and learned. Now it was their turn, and the hegemony was about to learn a bitter truth. Underestimating humanity was the most dangerous mistake they could make. The time for compliance was over. The time for resistance had begun. The vast expanse of space stretched out before them as the hegemony's agents descended toward Earth's orbit. Their sleek ships sliced through the void with chilling precision, their hulls gleaming with the cold efficiency of a civilization that had conquered countless worlds. Today, they had come to complete their final sweep of Earth's operations, ensuring that no loose ends were left before the final assimilation. The agents were meticulous, methodical, ready to assert total control. Humans, however, greeted their arrival with strange politeness. The agents were met with smiles, formal handshakes, and a parade of endless paperwork. they found themselves wading through the minutiae of human bureaucracy, forms, permits, and requests for delays. The agents were forced to wait, navigating a maze of red tape. At first it felt harmless, just the natural rhythm of human compliance. But as the minutes dragged on, something began to gnaw at their patience. Each hour spent in this bureaucratic limbo felt like a waste of time. But the agents pressed on, convinced that their mission was essential. However, they failed to realize that the delays were more than mere inconveniences. Every paper trail, every stalled request, every seemingly innocent form was a piece of a much larger, more sinister game. And the hegemony, too focused on the immediate task at hand, had missed the signal. Humans were playing their own game now. In the depths of their command center, the hegemony's leaders seethed with frustration. Earth's compliance had not gone according to plan. The delays had stretched longer than anticipated, and the endless bureaucracy was starting to test their patience. Documents that should have been processed in minutes were taking days. The security sweep, a routine inspection, had become a drawn-out ordeal. But even as their frustration mounted, a deep arrogance still clouded their judgment. Humans, they believed, were manageable. They'd always been manageable, even if there were small delays. The hegemony's power was absolute. There was no need to worry. Humanity had always submitted before, and they would submit again. Commander Talvos of the hegemony crossed his arms, watching the reports stack up on his console. This is nothing but nuisance. Earth is done. We've won. But beneath his arrogance, there was a creeping sense of unease. The data, the reports, they didn't add up as neatly as they should. Something felt off. Yet, Talvos shrugged off the sensation. Humans were predictable. They always were.
What makes us human? Philosophical. We're not the fastest, we're not the strongest, but we endure, and when it matters most, humanity changes everything.
As the hegemony's agents made their rounds, their eyes missed the subtle shifts taking place just under their noses. Human civilian freighters, once simple cargo ships, entered maintenance docks. There was nothing unusual in their arrival, but as they emerged from the docks days later, something had changed. They looked the same on the outside, but beneath their hull, something was different. Hidden compartments, previously unnoticed, flicked open, revealing reinforced armor plating, high-grade weapon systems, and advanced ammunition stockpiles. These were not just shipping vessels, they were war machines in disguise. Quietly, without the hegemony ever noticing, humanity had begun to prepare. These ships were only the beginning. The first wave of Earth's resistance was assembling, not in secret bases, but in plain sight, camouflaged by the banality of civilian life. A few curious eyes might have noticed the transformation, but no one suspected what was truly happening. To the hegemony, everything was business as usual. They had underestimated humanity's creativity, their ability to adapt and fight back under the most unexpected circumstances, and this time, the hegemony would not be prepared. Across the earth, beneath the bustling cities and peaceful streets, massive energy caches hummed to life. Power surged, but not in the way the hegemony had expected. These were not the systems used to power civilian infrastructure or industrial manufacturing. No, these were hidden reserves, massive stockpiles of energy, primed and ready for a different kind of conflict. For years, Earth's governments had fed the hegemony a story of peaceful compliance, hiding the true purpose of these power sources. The raw materials stockpiled under false pretenses were designed not for economic growth, but for war. Massive energy surges rippled across the system, unnoticed by the hegemony's surveillance, while the human leaders tightened their grip on the weapons that would eventually be used to strike back. And as the last pieces fell into place, Earth's military might have been silent, but their minds were sharp. The trap was set, the pieces aligned in a carefully constructed ambush. The hegemony, blissfully ignorant of the true purpose of the resources they had overseen, was about to fall into a trap of unimaginable proportions. In deep space, a small hegemony patrol ventured too close to human supply depots, curious about the logistical operations that were taking place. They were a simple reconnaissance mission, expected to return with basic data about Earth's shipping routes and infrastructure, but they never returned. No distress signals, no debris, just silence. The hegemony brushed it off, dismissing it as a minor anomaly, something to be forgotten. After all, a patrol of only a few ships couldn't pose much of a threat, especially not to the vast power of the hegemony. But the truth was far darker. What the hegemony failed to recognize was that this disappearance wasn't an accident. The patrol had fallen into a carefully constructed trap, a well-hidden defense system activated by the very resistance the hegemony had ignored. The trap had been set, and now the first signs of the storm were starting to show. The hegemony had thought it was in control, but Earth and humanity had something different in mind. In response to the growing mystery of the vanished patrol, the hegemony made a critical decision: send reinforcements. A fleet, large and powerful, was dispatched with orders to restore order and discipline in the sector. The hegemony was confident this would be the final nail in the coffin of humanity's resistance. But when the fleet arrived, they found nothing. At first, there was only the eerie stillness of deep space, then the shocking reality. Moments later, weapons fire erupted from every direction. The massive fleet was caught in an ambush, a violent counterattack that the hegemony had never seen coming. Ships were blasted out of existence, swallowed by the endless void of space. Minutes passed, but the battle was over before it had even begun. When the hegemony tried to re-establish communication, all they received was static. The fleet, gone. The remnants of their once proud ships drifted, silent and cold in space, their crews nothing more than forgotten echoes in the dark. And in that moment, the hegemony realized they had been outsmarted by the very species they had dismissed as a fleeting weak race. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had turned the tables, and the hegemony was no longer the hunter. Now, it was the hunted. Deep within the hegemony's command center, a hum of activity filled the air, punctuated by the relentless tapping of keys and flickering holographic screens. The mission, once seen as a routine sweep, was now an escalating crisis. The hegemony's arrogance, long held as a shield, was starting to crack. The data began to roll in, slowly at first, then faster, more insistent. Surveillance systems across Earth's system had detected strange anomalies, irregular energy spikes, unexplained fleet movements, and abnormal communications that didn't match the expected patterns of a peaceful, compliant world. The data seemed like random noise at first, but then the pieces started to fall into place. The hegemony had missed something monumental. Commander Talvos, his sharp eyes scanning the reports, felt his stomach drop. "What are we looking at here?" he muttered to his team. The room fell silent as the analysts worked quickly, piecing together the disturbing picture. Earth was not defenseless. It wasn't just a colony awaiting absorption. It wasn't the docile species they had assumed. Humanity had hidden its hand, concealed its strength, its weapons, its resolve. And now, the hegemony had unwittingly uncovered a grand deception. Panic spread through high command like a virus. The war they never expected, the war they had never prepared for, was already here. The reality was terrifying. The hegemony, invincible and complacent, had walked right into the perfect trap. As the hegemony's fleet hovered above Earth, watching from orbit, the planet's surface began to shift. Civilian stations, once thought to be benign, began to lock down. Automated defenses engaged, and hidden turrets, missile platforms, and dormant battle-ready AIs came online with terrifying precision. The ground rumbled as massive planetary railguns emerged from beneath the crust,
their barrels glowing with the intense heat of charged energy aimed at the skies. The Hegemony's eyes widened as they saw the unmistakable signs of war preparation, things they had dismissed as idle rumors. On the surface, every non-existent warship humanity had long denied owning flickered to life. Engines roared as ships powered up, their sleek forms rising from hangars and hidden docking bays. The sheer scale of humanity's military deception was staggering. This was not the Earth the Hegemony had been promised. It was a planet preparing for all-out war. Back in the Hegemony's command center, the full scope of their mistake hit like a physical blow. The humans, their supposed inferiors, had been quietly building an entire war machine right under their noses. It was too late for regrets. The prey had become the predator, and now the Hegemony was about to learn what true resilience and ingenuity looked like. The Hegemony, overconfident in its power, unleashed its most formidable fleet into Earth's orbit, expecting an easy conquest. Hundreds of ships, sleek and imposing, dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons charged, ready to crush any resistance. But Earth was ready. Humanity had spent years crafting a counterattack they knew would come. As the first wave of Hegemony ships moved in, humans were waiting, weapons primed, targeting solutions already locked in. The battle erupted with deafening violence, a chaos of explosions and fire tearing through space. The Hegemony's ships fired first, but humanity's response was swift, brutal, and calculated. Within minutes, the Hegemony found itself in open war, not with helpless civilians, but with a fully equipped, battle-hardened opponent. The so-called pacification mission quickly devolved into something far darker, a desperate fight for survival. Explosions flashed across the skies, and the Hegemony fleet struggled to adjust. Their tactics, based on centuries of unchallenged dominance, were suddenly useless against the human ingenuity and unpredictability they had failed to anticipate. The Hegemony had built its reputation on precision and perfect order. Their ships operated in predictable, rigid formations, always the same. They were efficient, but that efficiency became their downfall. Humanity, on the other hand, thrived in chaos. Ambush tactics, electronic warfare, and feints tore apart the Hegemony's once formidable fleet. The humans knew their strengths. They had no interest in traditional warfare. Instead, they used the Hegemony's rigidity against them, exploiting every blind spot and weakness in their doctrine. Ships that had been designed to dominate were quickly incapacitated, their systems hacked, their communication lines severed. With every passing moment, the Hegemony fleet's coordination crumbled. They were disoriented, confused, unable to adapt to the ferocity of the human assault. For the first time in history, the invincible Hegemony fleet was routed. Humanity was rewriting the rules of warfare, and the Hegemony, arrogant and unprepared, was on the losing side of history. Back at the Hegemony's high command, the admirals watched in horror as their fleet was torn apart in real time. The ships they had spent centuries building, the pride of the Hegemony, were being reduced to nothing more than wreckage in hours. Desperate orders to retreat were sent, but they were too late. Humanity wasn't done yet. The humans fought with a ferocity and tactical brilliance the Hegemony could never have anticipated. The war, already over, was now a massacre, and the once proud Hegemony was no longer the hunter. It was the hunted. The realization hit hard. The invincible empire, which had crushed countless species before, was now facing a species it could not control. Earth was no longer a target, it was a fortress, and the Hegemony had walked right into its jaws.
They said Earth was small, but when we spoke, the galaxy listened. And now you're here, not late, but right on time. This channel's been waiting for people like you, so don't hold back. Subscribe. This journey belongs to you now.
As the battle raged on, a final transmission was sent to the Hegemony's high command. A calm human voice cut through the chaos, echoing in the silence of the command room. You studied our culture, our art, our philosophy, but you should have studied our wars." The message ended with a click. The screen went dark, and in that instant, the war was over. The hegemony, for all its power and domination, had been defeated, not by a superior force, but by a force that had learned to adapt, to fight in ways the hegemony had never even considered. Humanity had shown them that sometimes the greatest weapon was not in the hands of the strongest army, but in the heart of those who refused to be subjugated. The hegemony's once proud fleet limped back to its homeworlds, battered and broken. Their flagships, the pride of an empire that had crushed countless civilizations, now drifted like ghost ships, systems failing, engines sputtering. The hegemony's leaders were in a panic, scrambling to assess what had happened, how a species they had underestimated had turned the tide of the war so decisively. For the first time in their history, the hegemony was faced with the unthinkable negotiation. The communications channels were open, but there was no message of peace, no request for a truce. Humanity had no interest in negotiating on their terms. The human race didn't need to plead for survival. It had already won. General Corton, one of the hegemony's highest commanders, stood at the console, sweat trickling down his face. "We failed," he muttered, eyes wide with fear. "They know our weaknesses. They won't stop until we're gone." The voice on the other end of the transmission was calm, unyielding. "This is humanity's demand. You will release every enslaved species. You will dismantle your fleets and surrender your weapons, or we will finish what we started." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration, a statement of absolute control. Humanity had dictated the future, and the hegemony was forced to obey. Across the galaxy, word spread with the speed of a supernova. The once unassailable hegemony had fallen, shattered by the very species it had deemed unworthy. Planets that had been enslaved, their populations oppressed for centuries, were liberated. The Zorath, a race once confined to labor camps, rose up with newfound power, emboldened by humanity's unyielding fight. The Trellians, beaten into submission for millennia, now found themselves leading rebellions of their own, and those who had once been forced to serve now stood shoulder to shoulder with humanity, not as allies, but as equals. The galaxy's balance of power shattered. The hegemony's iron grip was gone. As former subjects of the empire rose to take control of their fate, the hegemony's former allies turned their backs on them, recognizing humanity's ascendancy. The galaxy was no longer under the shadow of an empire. It was a chaotic, fractured place where new alliances were being formed, not with threats of violence, but with the promise of freedom and strength. No longer a minor species, humanity now stood as one of the most dominant forces in the galaxy. What had once been a vulnerable, insignificant species had risen from the ashes of war to rewrite the laws of galactic power. Humanity's technology, once seen as primitive by galactic standards, was now revered for its innovation and adaptability. Where others relied on brute force and predictable tactics, humanity had learned to use every weakness to its advantage, shaping the battlefield with unmatched strategy. Their resilience and ingenuity had redefined galactic warfare. As the former hegemony allies, once their conquerors, came to them with capitulation in their eyes, humanity held all the cards. No longer were they the ones seeking favor. Now the fallen empires of the galaxy were begging for alliances, not as conquerors, but as subordinates. The message was clear. Humanity had become the center of a new era, one where strength was defined by unity, not oppression. Far from the corridors of power, in the desolate expanse of space, the exiled ruler of the hegemony stood alone. Once the supreme leader of a galaxy-spanning empire, they now found themselves a fugitive, hiding in the shadows of a universe that had moved on without them. Staring out into the vastness of space, the weight of their failure crushed their spirit. The empire they had built, so carefully constructed, was nothing more than ruins. The once mighty fleets, the imposing cities, the entire apparatus of the hegemony, all gone. And as they stood there, staring into the endless void, the ruler whispered a bitter confession to the empty stars. "We thought they were ants," they muttered, voice cracking with regret. "We never saw the fire." It was a final admission, one that the hegemony's rulers would never utter aloud. The true strength of humanity had never been in its numbers or its weapons. It was in the fire of the spirit, the undying will to fight, and the refusal to be subjugated. And as the ruler's ship disappeared into the blackness of space, one thing was certain: humanity was not done. The galaxy had been changed forever. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in millennia, it was no longer ruled by the iron fist of the hegemony. The once indomitable empire, now shattered and crumbling, had given way to a new order, a coalition of species, united under a single banner. But it wasn't the hegemony or the galaxy's ancient powers who had forged this new path. It was humanity. Earth, a world once seen as a backwater of the universe, was now at the center of interstellar politics and military might. Its fleets were unmatched, its technology a perfect blend of ingenuity and adaptability. Diplomatic power flowed from Earth's influence, as former enemies now found themselves seeking humanity's favor. Captain Elias Ward stood on the observation deck of a newly formed council station, overlooking a galaxy that once feared the human race. He could see it now: planets, once enemies, now in harmony. It wasn't just peace, it was unity on human terms. Humanity had turned survival into a weapon, and with it, had rewritten the rules of the stars. On the surface of a distant moon, beneath the watchful gaze of 1,000 dying stars, a lone alien scholar sat, poring over the records of humanity's rise. His fingers trembled as he turned the ancient pages of humanity's history. Images of wars, battles, and unbelievable resilience etched into every chapter. The scholar had once dismissed humanity as a species too primitive, too bound to their planet, too chaotic to ever be a threat. But now, as he studied the records of the hegemony's downfall, he realized how wrong he had been. They were always destined to rise, he muttered to himself. The fall of the hegemony was not luck, it was inevitability. Their philosophy, their art, their belief in survival, this was their true power. The scholar closed the last book with a heavy sigh. We saw their culture, we admired their art, but we failed to see their wars, and that was our mistake. His voice echoed in the silent room, the weight of humility settling in as he watched the galaxy turn in the distance. In the sleek, metallic halls of a newly constructed space station, the hum of diplomacy buzzed in the air. Humans and alien species gathered in a grand hall, once bitter enemies, now standing side by side. The war that had torn the galaxy apart was over, but in its wake, respect had formed where once there was only hatred. Ambassador Kaya, a sharp-eyed human diplomat, lifted her glass, her smile faint but genuine. "To the future," she said, her voice carrying over the soft murmur of the room. Around her, alien dignitaries, species of every shape and size, raised their glasses in agreement. For a moment, the room was still. No one spoke, but the unspoken sentiment was clear. This was a new beginning. Zalor of the Veldar, a once formidable alien warlord, now turned ally, smirked across the table, catching the gaze of a human officer. "You always were a clever species," Zalor said. "I didn't expect this, but here we are." A human officer grinned and lifted his drink. "To history," he said, and the entire room echoed. "To history." It was a toast to the future, and to a peace earned through the fire of war. As the final chapter of humanity's rise was written into history, a single phrase, etched into every record, reverberated across the galaxy: never underestimate a species that stockpiles for war under the guise of peace. It was the last lesson the hegemony would ever learn, and a reminder to every species in the galaxy: humanity had never been weak, they had only been waiting.
They came, but they never understood us. In our silence, there was thunder. In our eyes, war. This story isn't theirs, it's yours. This channel is yours. If you feel it, hit subscribe. Don't walk this path alone.